Welcome to the Current Buddhist. I am Reverend Shen-Wen, and today I'll be talking about my current understanding of the next step in the Eightfold Path, which is right intention. Now, typically I go off of a script, but today I'm just going to kind of wing it. So, excuse me if it takes me a moment on occasion to formulate my answer all the way. But right intention is a bit of a sticky place to stop at. And the reason is because it can go very wrong very quickly, and it can oftentimes be used as a justification for an action that one took without perhaps thinking the consequences all the way through. You'll hear a lot of people sit there and say, "Oh, I'm sorry if that upsets you. That was not my intent." Or "I didn't intend for that to happen." Or "the intention was that this was going to go a different way." Um, and all of that may be true, but it also speaks to the fact that intention doesn't necessarily equate to positive results. You can look at in the American justice system, for instance, we have what's called manslaughter, and murder one, which is you intentionally killed somebody, and manslaughter, which is it was unintentional. And the punishments for those are different because we do recognize that the intention of an individual matters. However, that having been said, it's also important to remember that either way in those scenarios, at the end of it, somebody's still just as dead. So that shows us on a couple of different levels how troublesome the idea of right intent can be, because it shows you that we do recognize that intention plays a part in whatever we're doing. We do recognize that it is an important aspect of our thought process. And we do realize that you cannot always be held entirely responsible for the karma of one's actions in some cases, because with the way that karma and the world work, it can be a very complicated process and things can happen. And often those things are not within our intent. However, that example also shows that there are still consequences. They are very real. They're very true, honest, physically measurable consequences that somebody or many somebodies in the world have to now deal with. So, the loved one of a person who dies by accident is no better off because that death was an accident. They still have to find a way to go forward in this life and in this world without that individual, whether it was intentional or not. So that's always something to keep in mind. It's also important to remember that intention can sometimes lead us into wrong action. So, a common example that I see of this is if a homeless person comes to you, or somebody who you would, I mean, I don't imagine there's always much of a conversation previous to this, but someone will approach you in a parking lot or something. "Excuse me, can you spare some change or a couple of dollars for me to get food or gas," or whatever the current situation for that person might be. And a lot of times I'll see people, "Oh, I don't have anything," even though they do, or "I don't carry cash," even though they have cash, or they'll make up an excuse of some sort. And if you ask them why later on they did that, it's, "Well, I don't want that person to buy alcohol or drugs," or "I don't think that that's going to go to that person," or such and so on. And the intent there is that they don't provide a means whereby an individual can spend that money on something that the person who was approached would object to. Or even if you want to try and look at it from a more bodhisattva kind of level of things, that person doesn't want the homeless person to spend that money on something that would cause them more suffering, allegedly. And and the intent there might be, to a certain extent, a noble thing. I don't want that person to suffer, and I believe they would do this with that money, so that would end up in suffering. But it's important to remember a few things. Unless you know without a doubt that that individual is going to use that money on drugs or alcohol or something like that, you are quite probably missing an opportunity to do some real and measurable good. This is an assumption that you're making. This is a thought process that is existing within your mind, but not necessarily in the world. That person who comes up to you and says, "Can you spare some change? I don't have any money for gas," may actually be telling you the truth. Or maybe they assume that you're going to give them money for gas because that's a more reasonable use of it than, or believable use of it than, I need some food, or my husband got laid off, or my wife is in the hospital and I don't have any money for food for the kids, or something like that. So you might actually be missing the opportunity to help, and it's all because our assumption of the situation doesn't match up with the reality of it. So the intent is there to do something good, but the way that we go about it ends up causing more suffering, or at least not alleviating existing suffering. So we have to be very careful about that. Intention, right intention, should be informed by right thought and inform right action. So we get to right intention by looking at things and saying, okay, there's suffering in this world. The first noble truth is due to our attachments and our ignorances and our delusions, the second noble truth, and there is a way to alleviate or towards the cessation of suffering. And that is where right intention begins to show itself. Because we may know that there's a way, and ideologically speaking, that might be a positive thing in our mind. But is it necessarily our intention to cause our actions to line up with that? And that's where you have to look at it. So, right thought is the idea of knowing that there is a way to get out of this. And right intention is the beginning of trying to make it happen, of directing your thoughts along a positive and productive thought process and thought path to where action will then physically form out of your thoughts. And the karma for that will have as good of a possibility of becoming a net positive as possible. So it's very important that we 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 take the time to examine each one of these, or at least our motives under each one of these umbrellas. Because if we don't, there's a reason that the Eightfold Noble Path has existed for over 2,500 years. It's not because it doesn't make sense. And it's not because it's not a viable thought process building path for you to be able to look at your own life, your own actions, and your own karma and measure up against that as a watermark to say, is what I'm doing creating, or at least have the best chance of creating, a net positive as I'm capable of doing? And that's how I think we should look at this, this Eightfold Noble Path, is as a series of living watermarks. And one of the main reasons why there isn't always an accompanying definition to these parts of the path, like it doesn't say right action. Right action is the blah, 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 blah. There's a reason for that, is because Buddha, in his infinite wisdom when he was alive, saw that having any kind of dogma that was concrete and fixed and unmovable was unreasonable and an untenable way to live life. So the most genius thing he did was letting us know that this path, that these steps, that everything in Buddhism, everything, every part of the Dharma that he realized was situational and needed to grow with us as our context, the experience of the world around us grew and changed and mutated, and we began to know more about things and less about others. Our understanding of these paths, of these steps, needed to change with that. And we need to continue to try and make them contemporary and meaningful now. And not always just look at, well, what did this mean in the time of the Buddha? Because even the Buddha knew that this was not supposed to be a stagnant thing. Zen is a living, breathing organism, and it must go on with us into the new ages, and it must be able to be flexible. It must be able to change with us, and it must be able to our understanding of it. And that's the key, I think, is because it's not necessarily the Dharma itself. The Dharma is the Dharma, but even that is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. It's our understanding of it, our acceptance of it, our ability to apply it to our current life, our current situation, and not the situation of some Zen master 2,000, 1,500, 1,100, 600 years ago. Even they knew, especially they knew, that we had to take our understanding of the Dharma and bring it into whatever age we were studying it in. Elsewise, it's just a history lesson. And that's what we need to do with right intention. We need to make sure that our intention grows along with our understanding of the Dharma. At first, it's just, I want to do good. Well, good. That's good. But what does that mean? What is good? Good for whom? Who is it that wants good? These are all questions that we need to answer. And eventually we start to find out that good is situational. What might be good for somebody on Thursday in a certain situation isn't good for them on Saturday in a situation that might seem similar. Is it good for everybody, or is it just good for my intended target right in front of me? This particular person asking me for money, do I just hand them everything in my pocket? Is that good? Well, I mean, ask your family who that money was meant to go buy groceries for. See, there's a situational aspect to this. We need to understand that there's a middle path between these extremes of I'm not giving anything and here, take all my money. And that's why Buddha's understanding of the Dharma has historically been called the middle way, because it avoids these extremes. And it takes our knowledge and our understanding and our current awareness of our lives, of our existence within this universe, in this place and in this time. And it says, okay, now let's take what we understand of the core values and apply them here, now. What is the answer? What is the answer for this? And then we act on that. And once we act, the karma is now out of our hands. We should have done everything that we could possibly do ahead of time, examined our thoughts, examined our intention prior to initiating action so that we understood what is the likelihood of how this karma is going to go out into the world. Past a certain point, it becomes so complicated that we can't really begin to understand what the ramifications may be. At that point, we can only hope that we did what we could. But that is the purpose of practicing this path, and that is the purpose of meditation and things like that, is to expand our understanding and our viewpoint of the world. Expands our understanding of I to include all beings, expands our understanding of ourselves to include all situations. At that point, once we have a much more high level and expanded overview, our understanding of how the karma might play out increases as well. And we can begin to see that perhaps what we thought was a good intention prior to our growing understanding of the Dharma is now falling slightly short. And we need to modify that in certain ways. We need to change it a little bit to make it more contemporary. And that is the purpose of our practice. Ami Twofu.